In Pier 1 today, at the edge of the beginning of the reclaimed part of the port, stands a stone citadel, oblivious to the passing of time, but an obvious witness to the many happenings and changes in the almost 5 centuries it has stood watch over the Queen City of the South. This is Fort San Pedro, the oldest and smallest tri-bastion fort in the Philippines. It is one of the heritage architectures here in Cebu. The fort was built by Conquistador Miguel Lopez de Legazpi a few days after docking off in Cebu in 1565. This is 44 years after the first Spanish expedition headed by Ferdinand Magellan arrived in the country. But it was Legazpi who secured the country as a Spanish colony. However, the native Cebuanos then, led by Chief Tupas, didn't easily hand over the land to the invaders. It was discovered in an archaeological excavation in the surrounding areas of the fort that the place already hosted a pre-colonial settlement dating as far back as 1000 AD. Evidences of Asiatic trade pottery, such as porcelain and other wares, were found, further proving that Sugbo was engaged in early trade with other Asian countries. It was a rich community, and for the Sugboanons then, it was considered an important trading post and valuable settlement. Whether physical or psychological, real or imagined, our ancestors have built shelters and protected barriers against the elements, animals, and human enemies. And so fortifications, whether natural, such as cliffs, hills, islands, bodies of water, or trees, or built, in our ancestors' case, simple types of defense structures, such as those made from timber, were already utilized by Cebuanons before. The most familiar to us are the moog or ilihan, rectangular wooden and thatched structures built on actual trees or on tall parts similar to tree houses. We have to understand that before Legazpi's expedition arrived in the shores of Cebu, pre-colonial Cebuanos were used to warfare, war being the part of the ancient way of life. They either had to defend themselves from provoked attacks of other independent barangays, but more so for the main motivation of slaving. Thus, wars were waged not only to expand territory, but most especially to control people. Owning slaves was then a symbol of wealth. Forts are strategic positions or defensive buildings constructed as protection against attacks of the enemies. They are also a military installation where soldiers and officers were quartered. They serve 2 purposes, either as defense, shielding defenders and providing obstacles to attackers, or at the same time as offense, giving defenders the advantage in terms of position and weapons. Forts built by the Spaniards in the Philippines are reminiscent of the medieval architecture called castles. It is so because castles, which were the principal means of defense in 13th century Europe, had to be reconfigured to cater to the advancement in warfare, particularly in the use of gunpowder and in the defense of cities and towns. Thus, forts, compared to castles, had shorter though stouter walls, and had bastions, which were projections shaped like ace of spades, and altered the shape of medieval straight walls, as well as providing spaces for artilleries to be mounted. The bastion walls have now become active machines of defense rather than mere passive barrier. So when Chief Tupas, prodded more by the thought that the white men have come to seek vengeance for the Cebuanos' killing of Magellan and his men, refused to welcome, much less talk to Legazpi, when he arrived in Cebu on April 27, 1565. The conquistador had to aim his ship's cannons to the Cebuanon settlement. Despite setting the town on fire and destroying most of the houses, after which the Spaniards occupied the settlement. Tupas and his men continued to creep in and out of the place. This encouraged Legazpi to build an enclosure around the areas where they were quartered. Thus, on May 8, 1565, Legazpi marked out the site for the fort and himself broke the first ground for its construction. But even if forts in the Philippines were inspired by their counterparts in Europe, there was a dearth of suitable stones and absence of experienced stonemasons locally. For the time being then, the fort consisted of a palisade of coconut trunks, reinforced by breastworks or embankments of earth and sand. The Spaniards themselves had to fell, haul and hew the trees and carry the earth and sand for the embankments. The first fort made of wood was named in honor of San Miguel, for May was the feast of the apparition of Saint Michael the Archangel over Castle St. Angelo in Rome. There were two reasons why Legazpi built a fort. First, for protection against Cebuanos. Legazpi had guns mounted on the fort, probably the ones from their ships, assuring them that the cannons would keep the poorly armed Cebuanos at bay. Second, the fort was the center of the new settlement, the distance from which the construction of the church and Spanish dwellings were erected. In choosing the spot for the construction of the fort, Legazpi chose a tongue of land, flanked on two sides by the sea, and which could be defended from the landward side. The 3 points of the fort were then marked first by Legazpi, the second by Saz, and the third by other captains. The two sides facing the sea were defended by artillery, while the side facing land was defended by the wall. What started as a wooden palisade was rebuilt with stone and mortar in 1738. More to protect the settlement from pirates and marauders who used to plunder the coastal villages. The stone fort was named San Pedro, probably in honor of Legazpi's flagship, the same one that was sent back to Mexico after the Spanish settlement in Cebu was established. Enclosed inside the fort were quarters for the soldiers, the Cuerpo de Guardia, and for the officers, the Vivenda del Teniente, which was reconstructed in the later years. 3 bastions, the points projecting in a fortification at an angle to allow open fire in different directions, were named La Concepcion on the side facing land, dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary. The devotion of such title was brought to the Philippines by Spanish missionaries. Our Lady under the title also became the patroness of the entire country. The bastion on the left facing seaward was named after San Miguel, the old name which was given to the settlement by the Spaniards, and to honor the Archangel and invoke his protection. The bastion on the right, also facing the sea, was named San Ignacio, after Saint Ignacio of Loyola, the founder of the religious congregation, the Society of Jesus or Jesuits, who was a soldier before becoming a priest. His name was chosen to be protector of the Spanish military personnel living inside the fort. An account of the fort in the 18th century cited an inventory of its arsenal, which included 18 cannons, several bronze artilleries, arquebuses, muskets, even grenades and small arms and hand weapons. The fort also enclosed a few wells of fresh water, one still existing and which housed a most interesting tradition. It is said that one of the oldest images of the Blessed Virgin Mary was found in this well during the years between 1570 and 1575. It was a small statue of Our Lady with the infant in her arms and of European make. The image was that of Our Lady of Remedies. The said image was believed to be the same image of the Virgin that was presented to the Queen of Cebu on April 14, 1521. The discovery was considered a miracle to the simple folks who also attributed cures to the water of the well from which the image was found. Thus, a small chapel was erected inside the fort, and the image was also called the Our Lady of the Cotta. The Virgin was transferred to the cathedral in the 19th century, but the original image was said to be lost during World War II when the church was bombed. Her feast is celebrated every December 18th. The fort's significance may have been diminished in later years. In the early 1900s, the fort became part of the Warwick Barracks, a military garrison originally established in March 1899 by American military authorities. When the barracks were abandoned, the fort also became classrooms, part of the school that is now UP Cebu. In succeeding years, when the fort was turned over to the city of Cebu, it became the site for several functions: clubhouse of the Cebu Garden Club, the Cebu City Zoo in 1957, and government offices from 1978 to 1993. Today it is one of the famous historical and tourist spots in Cebu, and rightly so, for it has been declared a national treasure. Fort San Pedro continues to stand, not just a reminder of Cebu and the country's subjugation under Spain, a fact that cannot be denied, but, most importantly, it is a testament of the rich history of Cebu and the indefatigable spirit of the Cebuanos who continue to shape their story according to what time and the elements, or God, bring upon them.